This term, defunding the police, has been going around a lot. There's people on one side who are absolutely behind it. On the other side, people think it's too radical. Can you explain the historical context of policing as it relates to the African American community?
Well, absolutely. So policing here in the United States was closely aligned with the origins of chattel slavery, right? The original police were also slave catchers. In fact, if you look at the badges of former slave catchers and the badges of most of your sheriff departments today, you'll see a lot of similarities. Uh, the police in this country were set up to police those who did not have property and protect the interests of those with property. And at the time of our establishment, black folks in this country were property, right? And that origin and that history still manifests itself in our policing practices today. It's why we see an overcriminalization of poverty. It's why we see an overcriminalization in communities that lack economic opportunity or pathways to higher education. And that's really something that folks have been dealing with for a long, long time. And here in Los Angeles, defund the police is not, it's a new catchphrase, but the idea of divesting from our carceral systems and from law enforcement and reinvesting in systems of healing and care and opportunity, that's been a movement for decades now.
Do you see, or how do you see us moving forward? You know, Garcetti talked about that amount of the millions of dollars he was cutting from the LAPD, but what does that mean? What does it mean to cut funding from a police department and channel it elsewhere? And what specifically are we talking about?
Yeah, I think to get really specific, we need to be clear that 100 to 150 million is only what LAPD was already set to have increased in their budget, right? They were set as a department to have an increase. At the same time, 16,000 other civil servants in the city of Los Angeles were being asked to take a 10% pay cut and were being furloughed, right? So that money that Mayor Garcetti has offered to move is extra money he was already giving to the department. So we're not quite where we need to be in terms of a conversation about divestment and reinvestment. I'd like to see that number go up substantially and have a real critical conversation about what investing in departments and institutions of healing, care, and opportunity look like. But to be real blunt, $1.8 billion of the city's operating budget, that's over 54% of the discretionary general fund, goes to policing, right? And we are investing in policing at a time when folks are losing their economic footing, which to me sounds like we're investing in the criminalization of the poverty that the COVID-19 pandemic is creating. And I would rather see us move that money into pockets of economic opportunity, development, education, public health infrastructure, and the things that we know that our most fragile communities need.
What do you say to people that look at this idea of defunding the police and they see it as this sort of threatening, when I call 911, if something was to happen, does that mean I'm going to wait a lot longer for an officer? You know, that there are actually bad guys out there. We do need the police doing some of what they're doing now. What do you say to that argument?
I would say that we need to dream a little bit. We need to have a political and creative imagination that we haven't had in a long time. And I'd like for us to look closely at the model that's happening in Minnesota and in Minneapolis, where they've canceled their policing contracts in their schools. They've moved to defund their local police department as of yesterday. They're really looking to do things that haven't been done before. And we need that creative imagination here in Los Angeles and other places to move to a place of equity. We know that these injustices in our criminal legal system, and specifically police brutality at the hands of law enforcement, impacted on Black, Brown, Indigenous communities is not something new, right? Here in Los Angeles, remember 92, we remember the 60s, it's 2020, and we are still having this conversation. And I, for one, like many folks, don't want to continue to have it year after year, week after week, waiting for another video to come out. And so now is the time for us to push and do things we haven't done before. And to those that live in fear, I would encourage them to live in hope, right? There is nothing that lowers crime better than opportunity. And we are taking away our ability to fund opportunity when we fund punitive responses like law enforcement, when we should be funneling that money to the things that we know are going to really help improve and keep our communities safe.
And so just last question as we're wrapping up, because unfortunately we're running out of time. Is there, in that transition, if you were to really defund the police in a major way, similar to what looks like is happening in Minneapolis, is there a danger that in that transition we will see crime rise?
I would say that we are living in 40-year historic low crime rates. Folks were saying that about this decarceration push during COVID-19, the idea that we need to get folks out of our jails before they become powder kegs for the spread of the coronavirus. And people were concerned that crime rates would go up, but what we've actually seen nationally is that crime rates have gone down during the stay-at-home orders, even as 5,000 people have come home from the LA County jail. And so I don't want us to live and move in fear. I want us to move in hope and make the strategic investments in our communities that are going to give folks an opportunity to live their best life. This idea that our criminal legal system and our police departments go after, the bad guys or the bad people negates the history of interaction with Black and brown communities that have poor education outcomes, that have lower public health infrastructures. Many in South Central still don't have quality grocery stores. We overcriminalize places where there's not economic opportunity. And now is not the time to invest in that, especially during a recession.
Yeah, it's really such a big issue. Sometimes, I feel like I'm watching history unfold because the kind of conversations that we're having now on a much more mass level are not conversations we were really having at this level in previous years. So, Isaac, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.